Ever wondered why your MIDI instruments sound like a robot orchestra having a bad day? Trust me, you're not alone. Today we're diving deep, real deep, into making your virtual instruments and MIDI sounds as realistic as possible. We'll show you exactly how to take your song from this to this. Before we jump into all of this, do me a favor, smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's become kick-ass producers together, shall we? Before we understand how to make some amazing sounding MIDI, let's talk about the most common traps producers fall into that make their virtual instruments sound more programmed than a quantum computer. Mistake 1, velocity sameness. Yep, most newbies set every note to hit with the same force. This is especially apparent if you're penciling in each MIDI note in the step editor. Listen, humans are inconsistent. We're not machines. We have feelings and moods. Your instrument should too. Embrace the inconsistencies. Moving on, mistake numero dos, over quantization. Snapping every note precisely to the grid will make your track sound as lively as a pet rock. Your beats aren't a military drill. It's okay to be a little off sometimes. As they say, perfect is the enemy of good, or in this case, the enemy of realistic. And last but not least, mistake number 3, poor choice of samples or instruments. Not all virtual instruments are created equal. Some are the Michael Jordans of sounds, and some are benchwarmers. Your sound is only as good as your weakest link, so choose wisely. Now that we've covered some common mistakes, let's see what the doctor has ordered to fix them. So you want your MIDI to sound like it's got a soul? Well, first off, let's talk velocity. You can use your DAW's humanize function, or if you're feeling adventurous, manually alter those velocities. Check this out. Check out this line with MIDI data that I just penciled in using my pencil tool. Sounds okay, but it doesn't sound very realistic. It sounds pretty robotic. To humanize this, what we're going to do is we're going to open up the editor by clicking E on our keyboard, double-clicking in the editor space, then clicking Command A to select all of the notes available. Then we'll go into Function, MIDI Transform, and we'll go into Humanize. Logic already has a MIDI function that we can use to humanize. What this is going to do is it's going to take the velocities and randomly change them plus or minus 10 as according to this. This is going to help it give it more of a human feel. Let's select all with Command A, select and operate and see what happens. If you notice, some of the colors have changed here. The colors directly correspond to what velocity is actually being played. If we want to do this a couple more times, we can even get more human results. Select, operate, they will continue operating on themselves. So let's see here. Really subtle, but it's not as robotic as before. This is going to give your end result a way more humanistic touch. Let's get a bit groovy, literally. Instead of turning your tracks into robotic nightmares with extreme quantization, add some swing or groove. This will give your beats a laid-back, I woke up like this kind of feel. Let me show you what I mean. Let's take our same beat. Now, if we pencil these in with our hand, they will be perfectly on the grid. But just like before, we actually changed them slightly with Logic's humanize function. Not only did it change the velocity, but it also changed the timing slightly. As you can see here, these are not directly on the grid, but in fact a little bit behind and a little bit ahead, just like a human player might play them. But to give these even more feel, we're going to go to Command A, and we're going to adjust the quantization, and we're going to turn it down. And I'm going to add some swing to this. To add this swing, we're going to go into time quantize and go to 8th note swing C. This is going to really slightly quantize it. We can adjust the amount of the swing with this slider here. That groove is giving it more feeling and more humanality. On to tip number 3, choosing better virtual instruments. All right, you've got the money. Now where do you throw it? Well, how about some better virtual instruments? If you're using digital instruments and sounds, investing in professional sound libraries and samples can take your productions up a notch. As much as it pains my frugal heart to say, stock instruments can only take you so far. For realism and organic synth sounds, I'd recommend checking out Omnisphere. And for realistic orchestra sounds, Spitfire Audio's Contact library is fantastic. These are the Bugattis of virtual instruments, and invest in these and you are investing in quality. Now, for those of you budget conscious people out there, let's just check out what a different Logic stock plugin might sound like. So even just experimenting a little bit with different sounds, I found some sounds that work better for this particular track than others. My favorite one for this one was string ensemble. Believe me when I say that these can get way better sounding than this, but don't harp on the stock plugins just yet. You can still create great sounding things with them. So you've learned about the mistakes, and then you've learned the best ways to fix them. But your MIDI still sounds, well, MIDI. Let's go over advanced tips to blur the line between realistic and mechanical. Advanced tip number 1, layering sounds. You've got one instrument that sounds decent, maybe cool. Now let's make it sound amazing. The trick, layering. Use multiple instruments to give your sound some real depth. Let's take that same sound we were working with before and add some layers to make it even richer. We're just going to duplicate that track and duplicate that same MIDI data onto a different track. Now, because this is a string instrument, one of the harder instruments to replicate in my opinion, we're going to choose a different string sound and see if we can mix it in. Even add another layer. See if that helps. Maybe some cellos. You can even pan these left and right to sort of get out of the way. Already getting more realistic as the moment goes on. You can even add in different types of instruments to further layer sounds. Let's add in a piano and see what that sounds like. We can also play these instruments in different octaves to add different depths to our sound. Let's go here, click Option, Shift, and down on our arrow key to drop it down an octave. Let's go here. We're going to go into mallet this time. Let's go into a marimba and see what that sounds like for this last instrument. Hear how much richer that sound is? This is way more interesting to listen to. Don't go overboard with this. Sometimes it's easy to add too many instruments without adding so much more other than muddiness to your mix. On to advanced tip number 2, micro timing. Now it's time for some minute adjustments that make a monumental impact. It's called micro timing. Tiny shifts, just a few frames at a time, can create a rhythm that breathes. Micro timing creates better groove, flows, and can even help reduce transients before the mastering process, which can lead to a louder sound. Let me show you what I mean. Now we can do this with just a single layer, but we want to make them even thicker. And to make them thicker, instead of adjusting them in octaves or by actual notes or by adding different timbres of other instruments, we're going to adjust them by adjusting the timing of each MIDI. To adjust the timing, you can click on the MIDI, right click on it, and go into Move. Then you can nudge left or nudge right. We can set our nudge value to different ticks or divisions or even beats and bars if we want. Let's just leave it at 1 tick for now. And to know the shortcut, it's Option, left, or right arrow, depending on which way you want to do it. So let's click here, Option, left arrow. We're going to move this over 6. I'm going to count 6 times, move this one over 2, move this one over. Now, if we zoom into this particular part here, you'll see that these are all starting on slightly different parts. That's going to give it an even thicker sound. I use this trick a lot in my songs, not only for getting more interesting MIDI, but to get my transients out of the way of each other. Let's say I have a kick drum and a bass that are coming at the exact same time. If I just move that bass slightly to the right, my kick drum is going to have that transient, and my bass drum's transient is still going to be noticeable, but it's going to have way less energy. As mentioned earlier, when you have those lesser transients, you can lead to a bigger sounding master because there's not as much power and energy going up during those spikes. And on to advanced tip number 3, expression and automation. Real players add expression to their playing. Ever heard a violinist play in every note with the same dynamics and the same vibrato? Sounds bland. Use the mod wheel, pitch bend, and DAW automation to add nuances to your performance. It's like method acting, but for your MIDI. Let me show you exactly what I mean with this same violin line. All right, I'm going to turn down all of these extra instruments just so that I can focus mainly on this one so you can hear it the best. To access these settings after we recorded MIDI, we're going to go into our editor by double clicking on the MIDI and then clicking A on our keyboard to open up the MIDI automation, and we can go in and choose any of these we see fit. For this one, I'm going to show you expression. For the expression, you can do this with a mod wheel and mod it to a mod wheel as you're playing, which is my preferred way, but if you're doing it after the fact like this, you can manually go in and change the settings around. So check this out. This is what 127 sounds like, the highest amount of expression, and then I'll put you what 0 sounds like so you can get the idea of the difference. A lot of variation in dynamics. Check this out with 0. You can use this to affect individual MIDI notes and make your expressions even more alive. The best orchestral samplers have even more things that you can program with the mod wheel and automate so that they sound even more realistic. With the Logic stock plugins, you're limited a little bit, but don't let that stop you from making amazing sounding tracks. Today, we dived into why your MIDI might sound like it was created in a sterile lab, and how to infuse it with some real-world messiness and emotion. From velocity variation to micro timing, these are the nuances that make your music sound alive. Remember, the devil is in the details. Start small, but think big. These little tweaks might seem insignificant in isolation, but collectively, they'll transform your robotic-sounding MIDI to a full-bodied orchestral experience. If this video lifted your MIDI game even a smidge, then do me a solid and hit that like button. Share it with anyone that you think will benefit, and subscribe for more awesome content.